So I'd sort of prepared a very short presentation on spontaneous spiritual awakenings. So first of all, we'll just jump in. What do I mean by spontaneous spiritual awakenings? They're subjective experiences characterized by a sudden, overwhelming sense of connection, communion, and complete non-dual merging or experience of oneness with a perceived ultimate reality, the universal consciousness, God, or the divine. And these experiences are typically characterized by this deep sense of interconnection with the animate and indeed the inanimate world, a profound sense of bliss, of peace and equanimity, of a love that has never been experienced prior to that particular experience. And these experiences are deeply noetic, so they're felt in the body. They're almost felt to a cellular level. That's what people describe them to be, rather than a conceptual idea or theory. And this is really interesting. I mean, this play on consciousness and our perception of consciousness changes drastically after one of these experiences, in that there seems to be this common denominator with these experiences whereby people express that they finally realize that there are multiple layers, let's say, of consciousness or perception or reality, and that consciousness is primary rather than materialism. So those are very interesting points that sort of tie all of these conversations together. And indeed, these experiences can be physical, they can have more paranormal sort of characteristics, but that will be for another presentation perhaps. And these experiences can occur through no apparent trigger or can be preempted by things like spiritual contemplative practices, near-death experiences, of course, and contact with nature, homeostatic imbalance, but also, and interestingly, they seem to occur most frequently after profound psychological turmoil and trauma. And this has been sort of confirmed in my own research project, but also in prior research, particularly done by Steve Taylor. But whether short or long lasting in their sort of peak of the experience, i.e. the altered state, which one might find themselves in, the experience is almost always profoundly life-changing. And they typically lead to increases in physical and mental well-being, increases in pro-social and pro-environmental behaviors, liberation from past attitudes and beliefs. So often people report moving away from religiousness, actually, and religiosity, and also away from materialistic lifestyles. So people tend to become a little bit more holistic in their way of being, and also less dogmatic. And there's also this very interesting factor in that people tend to report this sense of greater mission or of selfless service. And so there might be changes in career paths or even in relationships. And because these experiences are so profoundly life-changing and so spiritual in their characteristics and their sort of phenomenology, people tend to then live more spiritual-based lifestyles, or tend to engage in activities that might be more sort of coherent to that way of being and of existing in the world. And that in itself, you know, spiritual-based lifestyles and activities might be, you know, they're sort of correlated with improved positive identity and coping, problem solving, and in that sense also are linked to decreases in psychopathological tendencies. So they seem to be all in all pretty positive experiences, generally speaking. So they're associated with a realm of subjective positive effects, but also they're also being measured objectively. We're looking at, we're seeing these sorts of results, very promising results in things like psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, whereby things like mystical experiences induced by psychedelics seem to be highly correlated with the level of outcome or of positive outcome in things like treatment-resistant addiction to alcohol, tobacco, but also other types of drugs, treatment-resistant depression, and also in reductions of anxiety, hopelessness, and fear of death in patients in palliative care. So all very fascinating points, and there's more, but I don't have enough time to go into all the sort of objective effects. But what we found in our own study, and we found kind of a number of different things, but I'm just going to focus on the most sort of important sections of the research that I conducted with David Luke some months ago, is that we found that the experience was overall predominantly positive in its overall effects, basically. So people reported the experience of awakening as being extremely positive in both short and long terms. But there was a slight difference in percentage from the short to the long term, in that there were more long-term positive effects compared to the short-term positive effects. And this might indicate that even after an initially difficult or even turbulent or traumatic spiritual experience, awakening experience, the experience is almost always perceived as positive, according to our own study. Of course, these studies need to be replicated and so on. We also found that temporal lobe lability, which are symptoms that are indicative of epileptiform disturbances of the temporal lobe, we found that they were these symptoms were highly correlated with the intensity of the spontaneous spiritual awakening experience, and that trait absorption, which is the depth to which one's attentional involvement occurs in relation to an external or internal stimuli without effort or control, was also highly correlated with the intensity of the experience. And why is all of this important? I mean, I think it's important for us to look at these experiences and pick them apart from things like psychopathologies, mental health disorders, because in its current state, mental institutions and mainstream psychiatry observe these kinds of anomalous experiences and are very quick to put them in the category of mental health disorder, when actually we're seeing more and more that these experiences can be deeply beneficial to individuals, whether they are experienced in conjunction with a mental health disorder, or whether they are experienced as standalone experiences. And I believe that if appropriately supported within our mental health care systems, we can bring out the full potential of human experience and actually help people move past the sort of any traumas that they might have in their lives. And yeah, they can be deeply transformative and healing experiences. We just need to learn how to best hold them and support them within our systems.